So it seems today that all the rage is about getting that old vintage filmic look. To do that, you could go ahead and buy an old vintage camera, learn the ins and outs of it, and of course buy a ton of equipment. And in my opinion, most people will not notice the difference if you just do it in camera or if you do it in post. You can just change a few settings and go to a more stylized, colorful vintage vibe with a lot of grains if you prefer that. Or you could change your mind, go back to log, go to Rec 709, and all of this could be done in post instead of just being stuck to one format and one roll in this one. To me personally, I prefer this look, but it might not fit all my projects, so it's very nice to have all these options in my fingertips in just one single plugin that's available in Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, and Adobe After Effects and Premiere. And with this plugin, you don't even need any LUTs or use any time to convert your footage from log to Rec 709, as the plugin has a built-in function where you just choose your camera and you're good from there. So it can be a great time saver. So let me show you. It's a paid plugin called Dehancer. But if the option is between getting the plugin and a few rolls of film to get a specific film look, then the price isn't really that bad considering what you get. I have personally had Dehancer in my shopping basket now for at least a year. I was therefore very pleased when Dehancer actually reached out to me asking if I would test their plugin and share both the good and the bad in return for me getting the plugin for free. They were very clear that they wanted my negative experiences with it too to get some feedback. So since I also got the opportunity to get a discount code for you, I figured it was well worth it. So let's get to it. Normally, I would make at least 3 or 4 nodes in DaVinci, as I would want a separate node to transform the log footage to Rec 709, as well as having a few nodes to adjusting colors and contrasts. Dehancer themselves recommends a node tree like this, where you adjust the primaries and do masks and color space transform before you enter the Dehancer nodes, and then you can adjust the sharpen at the end. But I enjoy challenging myself and wanted to show what is actually possible inside of a single node using only Dehancer. So all these other ones we can turn off, and we'll start from scratch on Dehancer. So you enable Dehancer. If we choose the camera, you can select either Apple, Blackmagic, Canon, DJI, Red, etc. I recorded this using Panasonic. My camera was the Lumix S5 II, which S5 II is the same. And you see the format will be Vlog, which is the log profile of Panasonic. Right now, out of the gate, it comes out with this look. I would prefer that it came out more clean, because now I need to turn off all these different functions before I can start my grade. So as you see now, I have a Rec 709 image, which is not as contrasty as a regular Rec 709 would be. For that, I can adjust the contrast later, so I'm not too worried about that just now. So the film setting has all the different film profiles basically listed as a bunch of LUTs. So you can scroll through and find a profile that fits your specific style. You can choose between a more toned down profile or a more colorful and contrasty profile right out of the gate. Once you've found a film profile that you like, you use the push and pull to adjust the look further. And here comes my first negative feedback to Dehancer. I would love for it to be possible to just scroll through the different types of profiles to see what the different settings does in real time, like you would with a font selection. I'm not someone who's very familiar with the different types of film styles, so whenever I'm choosing a look, I need to physically click my way through each and every single one of the looks to see what base I would like to start my grade on. After doing this a few times, you'll likely get familiar with a few styles, and you just keep coming back to those instead of using a lot of time to click through each and every one of them. So please, Dehancer, give us a way to just scroll through and see the changes done in real time. Sometimes the look of the profile might be great, but lean a bit too warm or too cold, or even too bright or too dark. So to combat this, you can go back into the source input and use the exposure composition and temperature composition to adjust it to your liking. Once I've found a balance that I like for my image, I'll scroll down into the Film Developer. The Film Developer slider is one that I don't find much use for personally, as I most of the time just end up using the contrast on the next slider selection. So it's pretty much just ends up being a glorified saturation booster, which it's actually quite good at. Now to the film compression tool. Film compression is another tool that I don't find too much use for most of the time, but I appreciate that it's there. It basically lets you quickly fine-tune the distribution of the highlights, and that's pretty much what I've been using it for. I find much more use in the expand section, which I basically treat as a lift and gain option to adjust the exposure. where you can choose to wash out your blacks or make them even more black and contrastful. This is super helpful to have built into the plugin, as it helps me adjust the contrast of the transformed log footage to make it more like Rec 709 and maybe even push it a bit further without touching the color wheels of DaVinci. Having this built in makes it very beginner friendly, and you don't even need to learn the basics of DaVinci color grading to make it work. Changing the color mode from normal to Luma affects the luminance of the image without affecting the saturation, which can be helpful at times, and I would just click it on and off to see if it works for that specific image. Now for the print section. You basically choose what paper you would like your film printed onto, and it has a huge effect on the contrast of your image. By simply enabling the profile, it doesn't really do anything, but it's when you start choosing a profile or dragging around the sliders that you notice there's a huge difference. As you can see on the scopes, changing the profile from linear to everyone's favorite Kodak print, it really crushes both your blacks and your whites, so it's very easy to overdo this effect. I find myself often loving the heavy contrast of the Kodak print film whenever I'm coloring, only to discover after the video has been published that I overdid it. So just be careful to try to watch your color grade over multiple days to make sure you still like the look before you're publishing. To pull back the heavy contrast of the film profile, I tend to enable analog range limiter, which makes the image a little bit softer again and overall improve the detail of the extreme contrasts of the print. Now for the color head. It is a great feature, and I mean great. I tend to get lost in DaVinci's color curves and adjusting the color wheels for basic split tone coloring, so having the color head built into the same plugin as all these other features is great. This is where me personally will end up making my film looking image into a more preferred colored look. I basically treat it as my color curves, where I can fine tune a single color range at a time. For a more film-like look, I can adjust the blues to be a little bit more yellow, while also creating a bit of orange and teal split toning, just inside of the color head. And just like that, I have some colors that I find myself quite pleasing. I'll usually just skip over the film grains until the very end, as it tends to leave a huge difference on the image while also slowing down the PC, so I personally find it best to just leave for the end. The halation is great to have built into the plugin, but I don't find it to be executed as well as it could have been. Dehancer pretty much just have two options to choose between: the 8 different types of profiles, as well as a slider where you can define the minimum light source of brightness to be able to produce the halation effect. I mean, it does look great, it's just very easy to overdo. Since halation adds some reds to the midtones, you'll end up creating a bit of a warmer look to your grade, even if you leave the strength slider to 0. And if that's not something you're into, you can easily combat this using the temperature composition at the start, but usually for me, some reds in the midtones fits. Dehancer's halation tool does however seem to be better than DaVinci's native halation tool, so if you're happy with that one, I'm sure you'll be happy with this tool too. Joe Works has a great video about this, where he manages to create a more realistic halation effect using DaVinci, and it has a free download link for you to be able to recreate that effect. It's a great video where he thoroughly explains the difference between real halation, his version, and also DaVinci's and Dehancer's halations. So I'll leave his video in the description below for you to check out yourself. Now bloom is another effect where I'm glad I'll have it, and it's very easy to overdo. You just need to play around with it for each of your frames and find something that doesn't look too unnatural. This is not something that will replace your mist filter, but it will give somewhat the same effect to your brighter parts of your image. Film breath changes your exposure and colors a little bit as the video goes on, which I don't think I'll ever end up using myself, and gate weave makes the film look a little bit jerkier. Another feature I'm glad that they have, as I previously had to use overlays to achieve the same effect, is Overscan. It's not something that I would use pretty much ever, but I'm very happy that it's there for the times that I need it. And now to something that I use all the time, which is Vignette. And it's implemented in a very good way, as it has a mask mode where you can see a circle and you can choose your aspect ratio. So I'll start by making a bit of an oval shape. I'll increase the size so that it's pretty much just affecting the corners, and then I will disable the mask mode, and you can see that it changes your exposure throughout your whole image. So it darkens the whole image, and to combat this you choose the feather, and that's a vignette that I would be happy to use. If I were to add some feedback to the vignetting tool is that if you want to change the center of your vignette, you need to add physical values. So 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, there's no slider to adjust this around. To be able to move it around more freely, you could enable the Open FX overlay. As you see, you can drag it around that way, but it's quite jerky, and I would prefer if it was just a slider. Hopefully this is something that can be made a bit smoother in the future. So now that I've done all the steps except for the film grains, I'll go back into the different sliders and fine tune them to my liking before tackling the grains. I don't tend to go too hard on the grains, but I find it to be very well implemented and easy to understand. I'll basically turn most of the sliders down to minimum before increasing the size of the grains a little bit, but there's plenty of options to choose between, which is amazing to have built into the plugin. Now that I run through all of my sliders, I'll look through all of my clips and just make a single note for each clip to make some basic corrections throughout. And there you have it. A quite clean, minimalistic grade using just a single plugin. Doing what I just did doesn't require any know-how of how DaVinci works, and once you get a hang of it, it'll take you a few minutes to put a stylized touch onto your videos. I've now used Dehancer for a few of my videos, and I'm pretty sure it will be a big part of my workflow going forward, even if I were just to make simple grades, which doesn't necessarily need the FILMIC look, as all the sliders makes perfect sense. If I wanted to, it would take me a few seconds to completely break apart the footage as well, if that's something you're into. I'll just make it a bit warmer, enable all the settings, and make sure that I don't have too much of the highlights clipping. And I mean, that looks good too. It's just very overdone. Like you see her hair is on fire. So much grains, but it does create a cool look. It's just not for every project. So yeah, that was my take. If you're interested in checking it out, use my discount code videografen for 10% off, and I hope it's something that you'll find as useful as I do. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and consider watching this video next, and have a good one. The whites are burning with this halation on.